The church fell silent the moment the billionaire laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh, but it was sharp enough to slice through the music, through the candles, through the fragile happiness hanging in the air. "He's just a janitor," he had said with a smirk that dripped with arrogance. And in that one sentence, he tried to reduce a lifetime of sacrifice into a job title. What he didn't know was that in a matter of seconds, the entire room would see who the real man was. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet power of love, take a moment to like this video, comment where you're watching from, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us what truly matters. Michael Reyes stood near the front pew, still holding the old wooden mop he had leaned against the wall when the wedding coordinator told him he wasn't supposed to be in the main hall. His gray uniform was clean but worn, the sleeves slightly frayed at the edges. His hands were rough from decades of work, his hair flecked with early silver, his shoulders carrying more than just years of labor. He had spent the morning polishing the church floors until they reflected the stained glass windows like water. He wanted everything to shine for her. For his little girl. Across the aisle stood Victor Langford, the groom's father, a billionaire whose tailored tuxedo probably cost more than Michael earned in 6 months. Victor had built empires out of steel and technology. He was used to being respected, obeyed, admired. He had spent weeks ensuring this wedding looked like it belonged in a magazine. Every flower was imported. Every candle hand-poured. Every guest carefully selected from elite circles. And then he saw Michael standing there, too close to the altar, too visible for his liking. The bride, Emily, stood in white lace, trembling. To the guests, she looked like any other radiant bride overwhelmed with emotion. But inside, she was drowning. She had begged Michael not to come in his uniform. She knew how people like Victor saw men like him. But Michael had insisted he couldn't take the day off. The church needed cleaning after the early morning service, and he couldn't afford to lose hours. Besides, he said he would stay in the back and watch quietly. Victor approached him with that cold smile. The whisper traveled fast among the guests. "Security should really keep the staff in the back," he muttered. Then louder, with a dismissive chuckle, "He's just a janitor." The words landed like a slap. Michael lowered his eyes, not because he felt shame, but because he had learned long ago that dignity doesn't need to shout. He had heard worse. He had been called worse. He had worked 2 jobs after his wife died when Emily was just 6. He had scrubbed office bathrooms at midnight, fixed broken pipes, mopped hospital floors. He had fallen asleep at kitchen tables with unpaid bills scattered around him. He had skipped meals so Emily could have school books. He had clapped the loudest at her graduation even though he still wore his work boots. He remembered the night she got accepted into college. She had cried in his arms, apologizing for the tuition cost. He had smiled and told her not to worry. What she didn't know was that he had already taken on extra shifts for months. He had sold the only thing of value he owned, his late wife's old car, to make her first payment. He had never told her. Now she stood between 2 worlds. The world that raised her and the world she was marrying into. The priest cleared his throat, trying to restore order. The music began again, soft and hesitant. Emily's eyes scanned the room, searching for the one face that mattered most. She saw her father standing alone, near the back, as if he didn't belong. And something inside her broke. Halfway through the ceremony, when the priest asked who gave the bride away, there was a pause. Victor shifted, clearly expecting to step forward and perform the symbolic gesture, as many wealthy families often do when optics matter more than truth. The silence stretched long enough to make people uncomfortable. Then Emily turned. Her voice shook at first, but it grew stronger with each word. She stepped away from the altar, her heels echoing against the marble floor, and walked straight down the aisle. Every guest watched in confusion. She didn't stop until she reached Michael. Tears streamed down her face, smudging her perfect makeup, but she didn't care. She wrapped her arms around him. The church held its breath. She called him Dad. Not softly. Not privately. But with a voice that filled every corner of that sacred place. She said he was the man who carried her when she was too tired to walk. The man who learned to braid her hair from online videos because there was no mother to do it. The man who never missed a parent-teacher meeting, even if he came straight from a shift smelling of bleach and soap. She said he was the reason she stood there educated, strong, and loved. Michael tried to stay composed, but his hands trembled as he held her. For years, he had worried he wasn't enough. That his job, his clothes, his simple life would embarrass her. In that moment, he realized he had been everything she needed. Victor's smirk faded. The room that once admired his wealth now looked at him with something else, reflection. Because suddenly, the man in the gray uniform looked taller than any billionaire in the room. Emily took her father's hand and led him back to the altar. She didn't ask permission. She didn't apologize. She simply stood where she belonged, between the man who raised her and the man she chose to marry. And when the priest repeated the question, there was no hesitation. Michael gave her away, not as a janitor, but as a father. The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was thunderous. Victor sat down slowly, his confidence shaken not by anger, but by realization. He had built companies, but he had never built a bond like that. For the first time in a long while, he looked small. The ceremony continued, but something had shifted. The candles burned warmer. The air felt lighter. Guests wiped their eyes openly. And when Emily and her husband shared their first kiss, it felt like more than the start of a marriage. It felt like justice. After the reception began, Victor approached Michael. The arrogance was gone. In its place was an unfamiliar humility. He extended his hand. Not as a billionaire. Not as a superior. But as a man who had just witnessed something priceless. Michael shook his hand, not triumphantly, not bitterly. Just calmly. Because he didn't need revenge. He already had victory. It stood in a white dress, smiling through tears. If this story has touched your heart so far, take a moment right now to press like, share it with someone who believes that love defines us more than money ever will, and subscribe so you never miss stories that remind us of what truly matters. And before we reach the end, I want you to comment one word below: respect. Let the world know that every hardworking parent deserves honor, no matter their job title. That evening, as the lights dimmed and the guests began to leave, Michael quietly returned to his cart. There were petals on the floor, spilled drinks on the tables, scuff marks on the polished marble. He picked up his mop and began to clean again. Not because he had to prove anything. Not because he felt small. But because this was his work, and he did it with pride. Only this time, when people walked past him, they didn't see just a janitor. They saw the man who raised the bride. The father whose love outshined wealth. The quiet hero whose sacrifices built a future he could finally witness shining before him. And as Emily left the church that night on her husband's arm, she looked back one last time. Their eyes met. No words were needed. Everything that mattered had already been said. Sometimes the richest man in the room isn't the one with the biggest bank account. Sometimes it's the one whose heart has given the most. If this story moved you even a little, don't scroll away without showing some love. Your support keeps these stories alive, and your engagement helps spread messages of kindness and respect in a world that desperately needs both.